Welcome to Syntax. On this Monday hasty treat, we are going to be playing a mini round of Stump'd, where Wes and I try to stump each other with questions on various tech. Now, today we are going to be doing a quick round of TypeScript Stump'd, which I'm slightly not looking forward to because Wes has been working on a long course on TypeScript, and I just use it casually. So, I mean, I use it to develop my things, but I'm no like, TypeScript genius or
into
anything.
the weeds. Yeah.
Yes. So be prepared for potentially 4 big red X's on this side of the table.
No, I'm not going to do like how do you key of infer a record conditionally? Because that's a whole nother level of TypeScripting. This is more just like user features that we'll be talking about today, but a couple little nuggets. We're going to do 4 questions each. So hopefully between all of the 8 things, you can learn a thing or two.
Yeah. And if you are not using TypeScript, you're probably going to have bugs, and your software, we don't want your software to have bugs.
Well, I use TypeScript and I have bugs.
If you're using TypeScript, your software probably has bugs. Yeah. That's just the nature of things, and that's why you need a service like Sentry to help you out. This podcast is presented by Sentry. It's really awesome software for just making sure your applications run smooth, whether that's speed, size, bugs, user experience.
Yeah, perf.
So, yeah, perf. Sentry.
Misery. We had some rage clicks the other. Sorry, don't stop the ad read yet, Scott. Let me tell you about my rage clicks the other day. We had somebody on the website, and I got an email, and they had a couple of rage clicks and then a dead click. And Sentry does this detection of when somebody clicks on something and there's no noticeable change in the UI, like nothing happened. That's a dead click. And then if someone does that repeatedly, that's a rage click. And it shows it in the playback. And it was really interesting because you can watch, it's a 15-minute progress of somebody. So obviously there's something going on there that they were obviously trying to click something and it wasn't working. And I was able to play it back and kind of see what was going on with the user and figure out what actually caused this specific error. So check it out. Anyways.
Yeah. No, I think that's important because you know what? Let's just talk about Sentry here. One nice thing about Sentry is that they get developer stuff. So like whether that is the concept of a rage click or their fact that your most viewed pages, if they're slow, they give them a user misery score, like how upset your users are that this page, which is accessed frequently, is slow. So I just love that stuff. So sentry.io/syntax. Sign up. If you ever talk to anybody at Sentry, tell them that you heard about it from Syntax because, hey, that makes us look really good.
By the way, speaking of really good, our landing page, sentry.io/syntax. That's a new landing page. Looks super good.
Yeah,
check
it out.
Enough of that. Let's get into some questions. You want to go first?
I would love to go first.
All right.
I'd love to go first. Here's my first question for you. How do you combine string literal types?
Oh, God. Combine string literal types. You
maybe give what a string literal type is for folks too. I mean, you don't have to, but
a string literal type is when you use backticks in TypeScript, and you wait. Are we talking about that now? You're confusing me of what they are here.
A string literal type is when a type is a literal string. So instead of like enum, you might use, here are the type states is equal to active, inactive. But let's say you wanted some root and some like suffix or something, and you wanted to combine some. Or
okay, I thought you were asking about what was the answer, which is the template string types. I believe that is the answer. So you use backticks, and then inside of the backticks, you can take 2 different strings, or you can take a union of 2 different strings and combine them together, and it will then create a union of every single permutation. So if you have red, green, blue, 1, 2, 3, that's going to kick out all 9 combinations of like red-1, red-2, red-3, blue-1, blue-2, et cetera, et cetera. So combining those together is extremely handy. And let me tell you a little kind of cool tip that you can do is you can also just type straight strings into those backticks as well. So if you have let's say you have an invoice string and you want to make sure that it starts with INV, what you could do is you could say INV and then just put a number, like $ curly bracket number inside of there, and it will say, all right, this is a type that starts with INV and then has a number at the end, which is really, really handy when you have like things like IDs or invoice numbers where it's a string, right? Yeah. But it's a more specific string.
Yeah, it's neat. Whew. Not even something I've used. So I saw that and I was like, oh, what's on your side?
Isn't that funny how sometimes when, like, I panicked there. And sometimes that happens when somebody uses a word for something that you haven't used before, or you're thinking about it in a different way. And that's stressful, especially in an interview when you're already stressed out.
You could, well, that's the whole thing. Your brain can work into all these types of ways where I'm saying like a string literal type, and obviously what a string literal type is, but it's not like that connection doesn't always happen right away with like what that word is with what the technique is. And sometimes words give things importance to things that make them seem a little bit more complex than they are.
My question for you next is, what is a TypeScript generic and why would you use one?
Yeah, well, a TypeScript, thank you for this question, Wes, because it's one I can answer.
Okay.
A TypeScript, and I'm going to do my best to answer it. A TypeScript generic is, if you think about the word generic, it's kind of like it's not a specific definition for something. It's a generic definition. However, what you're saying is when you're defining something as a generic, you don't necessarily know what it is, but you want to say that it's a thing. A common example might be you have a function that always returns the same type as its input. So you would say whatever that function is that accepts a generic, and it will return the same type of that generic. Or perhaps, maybe it's returning a promise of that same data structure or something.
Like a database function. Nailed it. Like a good example would be like a database query, right? You could query for users, or you could query for shows. And you're not going to make two functions, one for users, one for shows. You're just going to have a generic query, and then you pass a generic to that. You say, all right, I'm going to query for a user, and that will allow you to both have type safe input as well as returned value.
Yeah, and sometimes there's metadata on there. Sometimes you're not even returning the same thing, but you need to pick parts of it out. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. An array,
partials, part of it. Good. That's a good example.
Thank you. Next question here. How do you write a conditional type?
Oh, that's a good one.
I know. I'm sorry. I tried to go hard on yours because I knew you were going deep on TypeScript.
You use it's kind of like a conditional type is using the same, I'm going to have to say the word ternary, where ternary, and you do your condition. Usually that is something like something extends this. So if this generic can extend a string, so if it's a type of string, then question mark, you return your type. Otherwise, colon, you return the other value.
Nailed it.
Good.
Yeah. Woo. Yeah, those of you out there, I mean, the big thing is ternary. I mean, that's kind of it. But it is often like what you said. If some type extends another type, show one, otherwise show the other.
Yeah. And when would you possibly want that? Well, sometimes you are looping over a bunch of keys in a specific type, and you want to check. Like, for example, I just talked about invoice strings that start with INV. What you could do there is you could check if the invoice string overlaps with the type of INV and then a number. And if it does, then you can do things like strip off the INV dash if you want to, or you could, in that case, you want to do something different to that type, capitalize it, lowercase it, otherwise return a different value.
Yes. Nailed it.
All right. Here we go. I have a function that returns a promise of a user, but there are no types provided for that function, and you cannot generate the types. You cannot just write out the type yourself. How would you generate a TypeScript type for the return value of that function in TypeScript? Let me know if you want me to say it again.
Yeah, so you have, it's returning a user. That user's like coming from a database or something. It's not just like an object.
Yeah, you have the function itself is an asynchronous function, so it returns a promise, and then it returns a value, which is a user. But there's no user type. So how, without manually creating the user type yourself, how would you get a user type from that function?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could just let TypeScript infer it. You could hope that the library provided types in return.
That's half of it, but how do you, it is inferred, but how do you store that inferred value in a actual type that you can then use somewhere else in your application?
Okay, can't you just say type user equals infer and then the value you're trying to infer from?
Close. The answer is
brackets.
2 parts. First of all, you use type of, and then the name of the function without calling it. And what that will do is type of will give you the TypeScript type for the entire function signature. So the inputs, the parameters, as well as the outputs. And then you wrap that in a return type, which then takes the whole function signature and makes it just down to the return type. But that's still wrapped in a promise. So then you wrap that again in a utility function called awaited, which will then give you the actual return value. So if you ever have functions that don't export types, the way that you can get access to those types of the functions are type of, and then do a whole bunch of dancing with return type and awaited. Or if you want the arguments to that function, you just use the arguments utility function.
Really? Yeah. I guess the only utility functions I use are like promise. Awaited. I haven't used awaited before. So that's to get the values from something that returns a promise?
Yeah, it basically unwraps a promise. So if you ever have a type like a function that returns a promise that of a user, and you're like, I don't care about the promise part, I just care about the user, you can unwrap the promise with awaited.
Hey, by the way, on a totally unrelated topic, did you see there was a Twitter thread going around somewhat recently about callbacks versus promises in JavaScript and performance, and it was like massive? Really? Because of the event loop? I didn't dive deep into it. I just saw like, here's some interesting benchmarks on using promises versus using callbacks. Maybe we should have gone, or I think the premise was maybe callbacks weren't that bad. I thought that was really interesting. I'll have to find it because I thought, not something that people talk about. We just started using promises because they're easier, but
I'm not going back to callbacks. Oh yeah, I see the blog post. We'll link it up in the show notes here.
Nice. Wow, good find.
That's really cool. I bet it has to do with the fact that when you await something, it sticks it at the end of the event loop, and that is possibly an issue. I don't know. Have I ever had a problem where like, oh yeah, that awaiting the promise? No, it's the 15 meg image that I'm trying to download, or the blocking synchronous code that I'm running on the main thread instead of in a service worker. Those are usually my issues.
Yeah, maybe though. Maybe performance is of paramount, and you need to.
I'll eventually hit something like that. Yeah.
Next one for you. I think this one's maybe a little bit easier. How do d.ts files work?
Oh, good. So d.ts files are different than TypeScript files in that you cannot put JavaScript in them. You may only put TypeScript definitions inside of them. So d.ts files are generally generated from a code base that needs to be shipped. So if you are an author of a library on NPM, you write your code base in JSDoc or in TypeScript. Generally what happens is you generate those d.ts files and you ship them alongside your repo or in a types repo, and then somebody can include those via their tsconfig, and then TypeScript essentially knows about these types that can be used without having to import them directly from each of those values. So pretty handy. Also really handy for declaring modules that do not have types for them. So for example, the other day in the syntax code base, we used a Markdown plugin to add IDs and links to every single show notes heading. So if somebody's like, hey, I want to link to part of the show notes, and there's no IDs on your H3 tags. So we went in, I added a plugin, and everything worked great, except there was no types for that thing. And I went into the GitHub repo. There's no types anywhere. So I had to go figure out what were the types for that. And then I just threw them into, there's a file in our code base that we can put types into. I threw them into a d.ts file, and then I basically said, declare module, whatever the name of the module was, and I wrote all the types for it, and then TypeScript picked them up for that module.
Sick. Yeah, perfect.
Ideally, no d.ts files with JSR. Well, JSR will generate them for NPM, but ideally, we just consume the TypeScript directly, and we don't need d.ts files.
Yeah, I just got my JSR invite. I'm stoked to start using it.
Name one difference between a type and an interface in TypeScript.
Oh, okay.
This one is intentionally a little bit like, because almost never matters.
Almost never matters, but you can extend an interface, and you can't extend a type.
Yeah.
I mean, you can extend a type with the ampersand, right?
Yes. Okay. You're right.
But you can't use extend with
the extends word.
Extend keyword. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So with types and interfaces, both of them can be extended. But the way that you extend them with types is with the ampersand, and the way you extend an interface is with the extends keyword. Do you have anything that can only be done with a type or an interface?
Nothing beyond just like mundane syntax things that I don't know what you're looking for. I should know this, but I just use types really. So.
Yeah. It doesn't. That's what I keep saying in my courses. Is it probably doesn't matter unless you're going to hit something where I can't do it this way, and then you'll switch to the other. So there's a handful of different ones. Interface merging is probably the most common and useful one.
That's what I was thinking when I said extending. I was thinking merging, but you're right.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. So you did get it right then.
Well, I didn't say extending or merging.
So with interfaces, you can declare an interface multiple times, and they will fold into each other, meaning that you can declare interface window and put something on the window, and that's not going to overwrite all of the other window methods on there. This is really handy with, like, I'm using some Cloudflare stuff right now to run Next.js, and they have their environmental variables, and then they have some Cloudflare type. And if you want to add on your own environmental variables on top, you don't want to overwrite theirs. You just want to add yours into that, right? So using an interface in that case is the only way to sort of fold those in, because if you were to write a type, it would simply overwrite the existing type. So that's probably the most common one. And then the only one of the big ones for types is that a type alias can only be done with a type. So if you say like type whatever equals, in a lot of cases, you can't do those with interfaces. Same with like your merging example, right? You can't merge strings together with an interface.
Right. Yes. Here's the last question I have for you. And this one I think is also made more difficult by its name. But
okay.
What is a triple-slash directive, and why would you use them?
Yes. The triple-slash directive is something that is hardly ever used. In fact, I made the conscious decision to not include this in my course. It's for referencing external type files inside of a TypeScript file or a JavaScript file where you cannot import those types. So you will only ever see these it's like a thing from like 8 years ago. And in most cases, it's a thing from before ESM, before we had ECMAScript modules in TypeScript. So it was a way to reference where the d.ts files lived without having to import them into your TypeScript file, because sometimes people aren't using TypeScript files. You'll often see them in like compiled like IFI code that is output by a bundler, but I'm going to say probably never in your life will you need to write one manually. Have you ever had to write one?
Nope. And
No.
it is the point, which is one of the reasons why I added that. Why would you use it? Because I know if you gave that answer, it's referencing ambient types or those type of things, people would say, well, why don't I use this? And the answer is, well, you don't really use them now that we have ESM.
Yeah. All right. Last question we have here. What is a TypeScript record and what is it used for?
What is a TypeScript record? I don't know. It's for scratching. I am a record. I don't know exactly what a record is by word record, but I probably know what it is by concept. So no, I don't have an answer for you here, but I know I'm going to go, whoa, I should have known that.
Yeah.
When you say
a TypeScript record is
wait. Let me try.
Yes.
I think
all
I know.
Right, let's have it.
Okay. It's for defining, and it's a utility wrapper for defining an object.
Yep.
Yeah. Where you don't know the contents of it necessarily. Maybe not that you don't know the contents of it. Yeah. Okay. I'm getting worse. So
I'm that meme.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, I'll stop confusing you.
Man, I'm trying to think, because there are situations where I have needed to reach for a record instead of defining as an object. Maybe perhaps you don't know how many things are in the object. You could say, no, you can do that with an object too. I don't know.
A TypeScript record is a utility method, you nailed that, for defining an object type where the type of the keys and of the values. So very commonly, you will have a union of keys. So like I want the key to be small, medium, large, and then the values will be a t-shirt or a hoodie, right? So you'll say, I want a record of the keys are small, medium, large, and the values are going to be type of t-shirt or a type of hoodie. And then it's just a shorthand for, rather than creating an object and using the square bracket keys where you say key in whatever, you loop over them and generate it for you. It's just a handy dandy utility type.
I'm going to tell you what I almost always do, the actual object notation instead. No reason why. That's just how I've done it.
But it's more explicit.
Well.
You understand? Yeah. Like I said, it's just a utility method that lives on top of the actual TypeScript. So you can type it out yourself as well if you wanted to. And in some cases, you do need to type it out, because if a record does not allow you to mark keys as optional. So if you want them to be optional, you either have to type it out yourself, or you wrap it in like another utility function. Or if you want to add additional properties to a record after you've looped over everything, then you would need to do that yourself. Beautiful.
TypeScript.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, some tricky things in there. So hopefully you learn a thing or two. This is Scott and I put ourselves out there to be embarrassed about these things, so that the listener will learn a thing or two.
I think it's important to know that, like, hey, somebody asked what a triple-slash directive is, or whatever. Even though Wes got that question right, you might have heard that and be like, I never heard of that in my entire life. And you know what? That's cool. You don't have to be an effective TypeScript developer and know all the little nuances. But it is fun to, dive deep and get those types of quizzes going and get your brain juices going on, like, what's what. I I write TypeScript every day. So if you're out there and you're like, I don't know what any of this stuff is. Hey, that's how it goes, right? You got to learn it.
Yeah. And even just like having this stuff rolling around your noggin, so that when you do hit these problems, you'll say, those guys talked about that. What was that? You know, you can look it up and figure out how it works. All right, that's it. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We will catch you later. Peace.
Peace.